Daniel couldn't believe it. He kept shaking his head and pinching himself. Maybe this was reality, maybe it wasn't. All he could know and all he could remember was that all of a sudden he and his three friends were yanked from where they were, and now they're in the middle of nowhere. But as they were talking, they had to continue to remind themselves that, this was prophesied. God did tell us that this was going to happen, but we didn't believe it. They kept shaking their heads and they kept chuckling together. But the last thing that they kept remembering was the fact that God was still with them. He had told them what was going to happen, and he had the final word. But even with that, they kept remembering at family devotions every evening. Their parents kept telling them about this and kept reminding them that no matter what was going on, that God was going to see them through. Now, Daniel knew what the Babylonians were known to do and how they would take people from one nation and train them and then send them back to be basically their puppets for the nation. But Daniel really wondered, is this what they're going to do? Are they going to treat us right? Or are we going to get there and next thing we know, we're dead? Now this was going through his mind in the several days that it took to journey from Jerusalem to Babylon. Within the first day, he realized that Nebuchadnezzar wasn't there, and word was going through the camp that Nebuchadnezzar's dad had passed away, and he had to make sure to rush home so that he would actually get the throne. Which kind of seemed kind of strange, but at the same time, there's reasonings for this. Daniel and his friends, every night, every time that they had a chance, they spent time in prayer together, kept encouraging each other with the stories of old, and just remembering that, God's always been there with us, and he's going to see us through this. We have nothing to worry about. All the others that were with him looked at him strangely and said, well, that's great, but we don't really know about this. Finally, the day came when they got to Babylon, and the moment that they came over the hill and saw the city, Daniel and his friends were amazed. They didn't know what to think, because this was the area that was literally the capital of the then known world. And all the paintings and the architecture and the gold and everything that they saw was so astounding that they didn't know what to think of it. But Daniel and his friends reminded each other that, remember, God's in control. He's going to see us through, and we're going to be amazed by what's going on. The guards led the group into a central courtyard where Nebuchadnezzar was standing on a platform and told them what was going to happen and who was going to take care of them, and told them that this person was going to be taking care of them. And all of a sudden you hear a snicker through the crowd going, Ashpenaz, what's a name like Ashpenaz? Nebuchadnezzar shook his head and looked at the guards and said, well, just wait until they find out who he really is. They walked away, and all of a sudden Ashpenaz was there, and he said, I hear that you've been calling for me. Here I am. Everybody was scared because all of a sudden he wasn't there, and then he was. They didn't know what to think of that one. But he always laughed because he knew that he could get his way into crowds without people even knowing it and then surprise them. Then he told him, he said, here's what your schedule's going to be, and we've got the best of everything for you. One young man raised his hands, looked about maybe 14, 15 years old. He said, well, I thought you were going to kill us. Thought you were going to take us slaves. And Ashpenaz was really worried with that and went, You really think that we're going to do that? No, we're here to make you the best of your nation. And they're like, really? Oh, yes, the best education, the best clothes, the best housing, everything we're going to do for you to make sure that we can help you. Well, this sounded different, sounded interesting, but Daniel had a feeling in his heart that there was going to be something more to this than what they were being told. Time went on, and they were shown their different places, and all of a sudden the dinner bell rang. Daniel and his friends were really hungry because they really hadn't had that much, and kind of hard to live just on bread and water. They went down to where there was an extensive banquet table in front of them, and they looked over it and they went, whoa, we have never seen this much food. Of course, they had been used to the extravagant meals that the cooks in Jerusalem would fix the royal families, but nothing like this. As they looked closer, they realized that a lot of this food, probably about 98% of it, was stuff that they couldn't eat. Daniel and his friends looked at each other kind of downcast, but Daniel looked at him and said, let's just keep praying about this. God's got something in here that he's going to amaze us with how he's handling this. Let's just trust him and know that what he says and what he's going to do will be seen and will be said. So they went, okay, Daniel, we don't understand this, but we know God does. The other people in the group started running towards the buffet table, loading up their plates with all this stuff, and started eating. And Daniel and his friends had decided from the very beginning, even before they were taken captive, that they would continue to follow God and stay in the ways that he had asked them. Now, as they got closer to their spot at the table, Daniel saw that Ashpenaz was near and called him over and said, hey, listen, we've got a problem. And Ashpenaz looked at him and said, oh, no, you don't, because your problem's my problem. What is it that's your problem? Daniel and his friends said almost in unison that we've got a problem with the food that we're being given. And Ashpenaz went, oh, you better not, because if you do, that's my head. Daniel said, we don't want that. We don't want trouble, but we do want to make sure that we obey what God has told us to obey. And there's certain foods, most of the foods that are here, that we can't eat. Ashpenaz turned even whiter, and he said, if you're not eating, this is my head on a stick. And I don't look very good with that. Daniel and his friends kind of chuckled and said, well, we don't want that either, but here's what we are asking you. Give us 10 days. Test us. Give us water to drink. Give us fruits, vegetables, nuts, grains, the basic diet. And then see what God has planned. Now, what they didn't understand was Ashpenaz feared God. He not only feared God, he feared the king for his life. And he started to say no, but then he realized that if he didn't say yes, they were going to still be firm with this. So he said, well, okay, I'll give you guys 10 days, not a moment longer. And in his head, he was thinking that, well, they're going to fail the test. They'll end up eating all this stuff in the end, and my job will be secure. So he said, okay, I'll make sure that you have everything that you need. And he went, he prepared that, he did everything that needed to be done. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 5, day 9 passed. 10th day, the very last meal, Ashpenaz gave it to them, and he was so excited because the 10-day trial was almost at an end. Daniel and his friends finished their last meal, and Ashpenaz was cleaning up, and he was all excited until he heard the sound of a trumpet, which he knew that that trumpet sound meant that the king was coming. Oh, he was so frightened because he knew that this was his death coming. Nebuchadnezzar came into the council room, and he noticed everyone. And he noticed specifically Daniel and his friends. The king called Ashpenaz over and said, "What's so different about these guys?" Ashpenaz started to apologize and explain, and, well, I told him that they shouldn't, and Nebuchadnezzar stopped him and said, "No, they look very different. They actually look healthier than these other guys. What is it that you've been giving them?" And Ashpenaz explained what they had asked for and how they believed in God. Nebuchadnezzar just chuckled and said, "Well, it's funny with you mentioning this. I did give them permission to do whatever was needed, and they actually followed my command." Ashpenaz wiped off the sweat on his brow and was so thankful that it wasn't his life being accounted for. And he ran back to Daniel and his friends and was so excited to tell them that they would actually be able to keep on with the diet because Nebuchadnezzar had given them permission specifically. Now, it was amazing with that because this actually helped them with their studies. Not only did it help them with their studies, these 4 boys became even smarter than the smartest people there in Babylon. And Nebuchadnezzar was watching all the time. But what they didn't realize is there were other people watching them as well. Daniel and his friends spent morning, noon, and night in prayer. And every time in between that they had a chance, they stopped and they prayed and they thanked God for what he was doing. But they didn't realize that God had a plan that was bigger than they could even imagine. Little did they realize that as their time in the University of Babylon was completing, that plan was starting to come into effect. They finished their last class and they graduated. They not only graduated, they graduated with the highest honors ever. And Nebuchadnezzar took note because not only were these boys healthier, it seemed that they were 10 times smarter than the smartest person there in Babylon. So Nebuchadnezzar, he knew he had the idea already. He said, I'm going to put these boys to work. Had a specific spot for Daniel. And he decided that there were some other places that he wanted his 3 friends, but all of those 4 would be working together. There was no doubt in his mind about that. But what Nebuchadnezzar didn't realize is that Daniel and his friends would be a key in what was about to come. Not only would they be a key, but they would be the ones that would start unlocking things that he didn't realize that he was about to have. Dreams of forever, dreams of a statue, dreams of a stone, and of a kingdom that was not his own, that would soon be destroyed in ways that he could never, ever imagine.